Hello, Fifth Hour. The last chapter, at least that we'll cover this year in honors history, chapter 31 in our text on 837. That's called "From the Age of Limits to the Age of Reagan." So when you think about, we've covered everything in American history up to we'll finish with the election in '92 in this chapter with the election of Bill Clinton. So we'll leave out that last chapter, which when I think about distance learning, that's actually not too bad. We covered everything except one last chapter. Anyway, last week you guys finished chapter 30, which kind of wrapped up with Watergate and the resignation of Richard Nixon in August of '74. Gerald Ford comes to the presidency. I think I had mentioned, or you should have seen in your reading, that Gerald Ford actually replaced Nixon's original vice president, Spiro Agnew, who had income tax evasion charges brought against him. It is much more than that, but that's what he pled to. He was taking bribes as governor of Maryland in the '60s. He was taking bribes as vice president. If you ever are interested in learning about Spiro Agnew, there's a great podcast called Bagman. I think it's about 8 episodes or so. It was done by Rachel Maddow from MSNBC. I learned a ton of things that I never knew about the Nixon administration and Agnew in particular. Again, it's called Bagman. Anyway, back to chapter 31. So starts with Ford. Ford inherits a terrible situation, right? The president just resigned. We pull out of Vietnam in '73. Vietnam falls to the communists. South Vietnam falls to the communists in April of '75. So the United States Congress actually refuses to lend any more aid to the South Vietnamese that go in and help them, and then the North Vietnamese come in and take over. That's such a stain on America. 75, Vietnam falls. We had troops in there, 65 to 73 direct troops. We had won World War I, World War II, yet we couldn't defeat North Vietnam. And it really sets the tone for the '70s, that war, the Nixon administration, and just the actions of Nixon as president, which were very unfortunate. Anyway, Ford loses in the election of '76. Looking at on 839, there's actually a map. It was actually closer than it probably should have been. Jimmy Carter comes in. He had been governor of Georgia. He's a one-term Democratic president. He inherits declining economy. Under Ford, there was what's called stagflation, a stagnant economy, and rising prices through inflation. So Carter inherits a declining economy. We're suffering through that loss of Vietnam. He has really no Washington political experience, so he has a hard time working with Congress. He does get the Camp David Accords, which is a peace between Egypt and Israel. Other than that, he signs over return of the Panama Canal to the Panamanians. But Carter is probably best known for being a great ex-president and not president. His time in office is marked by the Iranian hostage crisis, which started in 1979. This is covered on page 840. It doesn't end until Reagan is sworn in. On the day that Ronald Reagan is sworn in 1981, Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran releases the American hostages that were taken from the American embassy. The hostages were taken because we had let the Shah of Iran into our country for cancer treatment. You're going to get the rise of Reagan. He really speaks to conservatives, Christian conservatives. You're going to get this rise of the right, talk about, and the Sun Belt power, political power of the Southwest. Reagan economic situation is bad when he comes into office in 1981. We have a really bad recession in '82. We're coming out of it by '83 and '84. He wins a landslide election against Mondale in '84. Check out page 845. I've showed you that political map before, where you see. I'm sorry, that's not on 845. It's on 850. The only state that Mondale wins is Minnesota and Washington, D.C. And there's also, so Reagan has this idea of supply side economics, or Reagan economics, that huge tax cuts are going to stimulate spending by the people who get those tax cuts, which the tax cuts under Reagan went to wealthy people. That did not really play out. That's the argument that we still have politicians making today, and it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And then the fall of the Soviet Union's talked about in 850. In our chat this week, I'm going to have you look at an excerpt from Reagan's speech at Brandenburg Gate in West Germany in 87. We get the election of 88. George Bush is elected. George Bush was Reagan's vice president, so we have 12 uninterrupted years of Republican, at least presidential rule. Now, the Democrats control at least one House of Congress in those years. President Bush, probably the first Bush, probably best known for the first Iraq War or Operation Desert Storm, the Americans with Disabilities Act. But again, he also faces a recession going into 1990, 1991, and the recession is kind of what guides the political process in the election in 92. You've got a third-party candidate who actually does really well in 92 named Ross Perot. He doesn't win any states, but on 854 we see that he gets about 20 million votes. Most of those votes probably would have gone to George H.W. Bush. Bill Clinton is elected in 92, and then the economy rebounds through the rise of the internet and internet companies, and that's kind of what that last chapter that we're going to skip goes over. Anyway, that's chapter 31 in a nutshell. Again, our chat is going to be the Reagan speech at Brandenburg Gate, which I have uploaded. Our discussion board is to talk about whether you would consider Ronald Reagan to be one of the, quote, great presidents. I still hear from my grandpa about how Reagan ruined the country. I think I've shared that with you guys before, too. I mean, he's been dead for however many years, but Reagan still blames everything on Reagan. But a lot of people sing his praises. So that's where we're going. We'll talk about finals this week, too, and kind of what that's going to look like. I think I'm going to do a hybrid of SAQs and multiple choice questions, and I'll talk to you about timing for that. Hope you guys have a great week, and take care.